Hello, everybody. This is your mindful CPA Sinishmeta here responding to a question that came into Dear Western. And the question that was sent in said, do you have any suggestions on how to go about doing a fraud brainstorming meeting as a sole practitioner? Now, we know that we need to meet the requirements of AUC 240 on financial audits, which includes fraud brainstorming. But then how do we do that as a sole practitioner when all we have is me, I, and mine, where we don't have necessarily a proper planning meeting, the ability to work with multiple people and do a full-on brainstorming session? So here are 3 tips to how to make it happen in a good, evolved, adaptive way to where you meet the requirements of AUC 240 and at the same time, we are efficient and we are effective in terms of potentially looking at any risks. After all, we are in the business of risk-based audits. And when we think about inherent risk, that includes fraud risk. And of course, we need to assess that, given the spectrum of inherent risk and whether there is a fraud risk, a significant risk. So the 3 tips that I would suggest you do is, number 1, we know we need to get an update our understanding of internal control on all audits. And that includes evaluating the design of internal controls, ensuring that they can either prevent, detect, or correct something from going wrong. And then, of course, we need to verify the implementation of internal controls doing a walkthrough or similar. Now, what we can do as sole practitioners is leverage that design evaluation, which includes whether, again, the client has controls to prevent, detect, or correct something from going wrong that is either an error or an intentional act, which of course is fraud. So what we can do is we can list the potential what could go wrongs in a checklist based on your knowledge of your client, your knowledge of your client's industry, and the very typical what could go wrongs that do take place within that industry, even for that matter at a cycle level, whether it's revenue, whether it's purchasing, whether it's payroll, whether it's disbursements, whether it's receipts, whether it's inventory, etc. And then in conjunction with that required fraud interview that you would do with the key client personnel, maybe ownership, maybe somebody in management, you can use this checklist that you've developed to assess the design of the evaluation and leverage that in terms of what we would consider fraud brainstorming. Because in essence, what you've done is you've gone through and tried to find out whether their client has internal controls to mitigate, especially anything that could be intentionally done. And then finally, if you are using a practitioner rate such as PPC or Knowledge Coach or other, you can leverage their list of what could go wrong. But I always believe in creating our own checklists. So given your clients, given their industry, and given the typical what could go wrongs that the client may have, you could develop your cheat sheets or your checklist that be personal to you that you can then fill out in conjunction with a fraud interview that ultimately serve as your fraud brainstorming in essence, and also get you in compliance with AUC 240. Finally, of course, like anything else and everything else in auditing, document, document, document. They often say that we don't get credit for the work we do as auditors because we somehow do not document well. So again, document and document quickly right after you conduct any kind of fraud brainstorming or interviews so that it's fresh and that way you can capture everything. If you ever have a question for Dear Western, simply email them at western@westerncpe.com. Once again, my name is Sinishmeta, and you can, of course, tune into my webcast, catch me, or rather, catch the deception if you can, which is available as a webcast for 4 hours of CPE credit. Thanks, everybody.